My name is John Glanville and I specialise in treating anxiety and OCD. And in this short video, I would like to share with you some of the patterns and knowledge that I've gathered whilst helping hundreds of people, including myself, to understand, then interrupt and finally let go of OCD and its associated fears, worries, anxieties, and silly games. We will delve deeper into the way OCD operates so you can have a clearer understanding of what's happening to you. And therefore, when you're ready to tackle the OCD head on, you'll be better informed of just what you're dealing with. Because OCD really is a sneaky little creature. I won't be saying pull yourself together, and I won't be saying can't you see how silly this is, because we already know that. So what's OCD? Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I don't really like that word disorder. It's more like obsessive compulsive order, because there's no disorder in OCD. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Most things are unbelievably planned, thought through, and very orderly. I sometimes call it COD, carefully orchestrated dilemmas. Anyway, a popular medical definition for OCD is a common, chronic, and long-lasting disorder in which a person has uncontrollable, recurring thoughts, obsessions, and behaviours, compulsions, that he or she feels the urge to repeat over and over. And yeah, that seems okay. However, I think we need to add how it affects the experiencer's life, their health, their happiness, their emotional stability, their self-worth, their energy, how it affects their work, how it disrupts their relationships. It truly can unsettle a person's life. Now, OCD is part of the anxiety group of mental health issues, and I'm not going to go into too much depth about anxiety in this video. However, there's lots of information on my website about anxiety. It is very important, though, to be aware that the management of anxiety at a core level will need to be initially addressed so that the subsequent phasing out of this secondary condition, which we call OCD, is actually possible. Then we need to ask ourselves, is OCD the problem or the symptom? Is checking that the door is locked a symptom of something else or a problem in its own right? And of course the answer is it's both. However, most people focus on stopping the behaviour and not identifying with the underlying source of that behaviour. And we often lose track of what has become the norm, rather than what started it all off in the first place, which may have been many, many years ago. And when observed from my own experience, OCD breaks down into 4 key areas. First group are the intrusive thoughts that often lead to obsessive ways of thinking. And these may range from simple self-doubts right through to horrific unwanted thoughts about harming people or all sorts of different things. And secondly, we have the compulsions. And these are the mental, bodily or behavioural rituals that we feel we must carry out to lessen our anxiety or to calm us down or to stop something else happening. Then thirdly, we must acknowledge that OCD tends to make us very controlling individuals, controlling of people, situations, outcomes, to ensure that we can control and avoid the anxiety triggers or to manage our rituals. And often we can't see this control, but it's very obvious to other people. And these controlling strategies may be overt, such as getting angry at someone to make the person comply, or quite covert, such as saying, oh, I'll just stay in, you go out, I'll be fine, where guilt is used to control others, and then we may even feel guilty for doing it in the first place. Then comes the strategies that we may need to run that allow us to cover up our habits. For example, someone might say, if I get to work early, then nobody will see me disinfect my desk and disinfect my phone. Or they may say, well, they may think, if I'm shy and quiet, people won't ask me to do things. So let's dig deeper into these 4 headlines, starting with the obsessive and intrusive thoughts. Let's explore some of the more common ways OCD hits us with involuntary thoughts and obsessions. And remember this, just because you had a thought doesn't mean you made it. It doesn't even mean that it actually means anything. Your brain is just a very clever thought proposal device. And we all have some unsolicited thoughts from time to time that are silly or weird. And for most people, they just ignore them. For example, it's pretty often people have a little thought that comes into their head, says, what if I just kill myself? And these people, they just seem to watch that thought arise, they watch it, and then they just let it go. They don't take it personally, or they don't give it any deep meaning. It was just an unsolicited thought. However, when we experience OCD, we have a lot more uninvited thoughts that cover a wide spectrum of topics and fearful dilemmas. Typical examples are, what if I harm someone? Did I hit that cyclist whilst I was driving? Did I poison that cup of tea I gave to that person? Are those people following me? Did I lock the house? What if I harm my baby? Does that pain in my stomach mean I have cancer? And as these intrusive thoughts become more common, more repetitive, the fears that they engender seem to become more and more real and more relentless. And it's scary and it's exhausting. And to combat these scarily real but unrequested obsessive thoughts, we might stumble upon strange habits, which may often become compulsions, that provide a temporary respite or a distraction from the anxiety and the fear. And the compulsions, in and of themselves, are quite irrelevant. Whether you have to count everything 3 times, or line up all your tins in a cupboard, or put your left shoe on first, these are just strange behaviours that you've picked up to help you control your anxiety. And please be aware that if you're trying to overcome your OCD by solely focusing on overcoming these compulsions, you're missing the point. The compulsions are just a symptom of the anxiety. Plus, even if you learn to manage a particular compulsion, your unconscious mind will just morph it into another differing compulsion. This is why the 3 most important things to work on when you're ready for change is, number 1, separating you from your thoughts. The thoughts are in you, but they're not you. You're not asking for them. They don't mean anything. Secondly, understanding and managing the underlying anxiety. And then the third thing is to spend more time being calm so that you can recalibrate your emotions. If we look at some of the more common compulsions, rituals and thoughts and behaviours, the actual list is truly endless. The human unconscious mind can, with the logic of a child, get you to believe and do almost anything. Maybe pause the video just now and take a moment to have a look. Either way, it's exhausting. Just looking at all the ways we can trap and scare ourselves. And as I said before, these are the symptoms of the underlying anxiety. And it's there where your focus needs to be placed if you really want big change. If we look at covering it all up, it can be exhausting to cover up your anxiety, to cover up all the behavioural tics and rituals that you have to perform. And what I've noticed over the years is people fall into a few categories. The first category I call the stay-at-home prisoner. And for some individuals who've experienced OCD issues around germs, infection, blood and cleanliness, the idea of working in shared offices or visiting shopping centres or public areas, or even taking children to school where there's so many germs and colds and things, it becomes fearful and distressing. Therefore, it becomes easier to stay at home in a sanitised environment. Then we have the technical loners. This group learn how to manage their ruminations and compulsions by losing themselves in distracting thought processes or complex mental tasks like science-based activities or technical careers where they can often just work alone or in small groups. And they often attract partners who are also very technical or happy to live in a more enclosed and structured living environment. One of my favourite groups are the self-employed controllers. And for some, it's just so much easier to manage their OCD compulsions by working for themselves. And I've always been amazed at how many business owners have varying degrees of compulsive behaviours and scary, intrusive thoughts. And not only do they work for themselves, they usually only have 1 or 2 employees, or they employ family members to assist them. This way they can still earn a living and they can more easily cover up their compulsions, and they can do it in the privacy of their own office. And if their office is in their home, all the better. The next group are called the get on with it anyway pragmatists. And I think this is by far the biggest group. And in some ways they have the hardest time because they're always trying to face their fears and just get on with it. In other ways, they're the most free of the group because they can kind of function despite the OCD. And this group will find that their compulsions and ruminations will increase with stress and disruption. Therefore, holidays and Christmas and job interviews and dating, travel, surprise events, they can be times of great anxiety and very, very mentally exhausting. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that OCD is a subset of anxiety. Therefore, if you're going to overcome your OCD, first you need to understand the headlines about anxiety and how it operates. And anxiety rule number 1 is you can't think your way out of anxiety. Anxiety is in fact a problem of thinking too much. And because your body responds to your thoughts as if they were true, your body becomes very tired and very exhausted. Anxiety rule number 2, anxiety unconsciously tries to make you stay at home. And nearly all forms of anxiety try to unconsciously make the experience a stay at home or to go back home where they'll feel safer or at least less unsafe. And OCD is no exception. The way your unconscious does this is to look for any underlying fears that you have, probably learned in childhood, and then it plays on them. A simple way to look at this might be to say that the unconscious nervous system becomes very tired, very exhausted from long periods of being anxious, and it doesn't like this, and it wants to be able to relax and recharge, and it assumes, with only the logic of a 10-year-old, that if you stay at home, you'll recover, you'll get better. However, this only works if you stay at home and you stop thinking. And most people with OCD, they stay at home and then they think even more, which tires them out even more, and thus the cycle just repeats itself around and around. These unconscious sabotage and compulsions can be sorted into 5 categories, and typically any anxiety sufferer has symptoms from at least a couple of these categories. The first unconscious hijacking class is travel. Here, the anxiety heightens the further you travel away from home. So, for example, flying, driving on motorways, going on trains. And the logic here is very simple when viewed from your unconscious mind, which is quite childlike. It's, if I give him a panic attack on an aeroplane, he'll stop flying and he'll stay at home. It's quite simple when you look at it from these perspectives. The second class of unconscious hijacking is your health. And your unconscious mind, in association with your unconscious nervous system, can use your health in 3 main ways to scare you and to frighten you into staying at home. Firstly, it can make you ill. It can give you serious diseases. We know this for a fact. Secondly, the mind can present you with psychosomatic illnesses like headaches and eczema, chronic fatigue, IBS, ME, fibromyalgia, where there's no actual disease, but there is an illness, and that illness has real physical symptoms which often make you stay at home. And then finally in this group there's hypochondria, where the person fears every little ache and pain and needs constant reassurance that they'll be okay. They hate being left alone, and this leads to them not being able to work, so they stay at home. Can you see how these patterns start to form? Category 3 is unconsciously sabotaging your work. And here your unconscious wants you to be at home and not at work, so it unconsciously sabotages you and you end up doing really silly things at work. And if someone says, "Why did you do that?" you say, "I don't know," but you just keep doing them. Yeah. Category 4 is the same thing but sabotaging relationships. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of compromise to be in a relationship. However, OCD doesn't like to compromise. Therefore, it's very common for anxious people to unconsciously sabotage their close relationships with things like anger or affairs or too controlling or very rude comments. And unconsciously, they try to end the relationship so that they can stay at home and be realigned with their OCD propensities. These are unconscious strategies that run underneath your conscious radar. And the last category is sabotaging your social life. This means getting anxious around friends or in intimate social events, or becoming afraid in social places like cinemas, shopping centres, busy streets. And once again, the logic is simple. If she goes out of the house, I'll scare her and then she'll go home. And when you look at OCD from this perspective, you can see why it takes such a long time to get ready to leave the house and then to lock the house. And then once you're out of the house, you have to control everything until you can get back home again. Let's talk about some sensible mindsets that you can develop that will help you when you're ready to look at some sort of recovery program. With the right help and the right attitude and enough time, I believe that most people can get their OCD to a very manageable state or even overcome it. It's not easy, but it is possible. So here are 10 things to consider when you're ready to do something about your OCD. Tip number 1, OCD is not a disease. You weren't born with it, you didn't catch it. It's a complex combination of thoughts, feelings and behaviours that have unconsciously programmed the brain and the body, and with the right help, it can usually be unprogrammed. Tip number 2, most of the things that need changing are held unconsciously, or you might call it subconsciously, which means they're involuntary. Therefore, you can't consciously think your way out of OCD. Logical thinking makes it worse. Tip number 3, your compulsions are a symptom, not the problem. Although they do cause problems, you need help to address the underlying fear of being anxious before the compulsions can be worked on. Tip number 4, you are not your thoughts. The brain is just an organ that coordinates and proposes thoughts. They aren't truths, and just watch the thoughts, just observe the thoughts as they arise and don't give them any meaning. Tip number 5, your unconscious mind uses the logic of a child to try to keep you safe. For example, it thinks if he stays in his room, then nothing bad will happen. This is the simple logic that you need to apply to all of OCD behaviours, and then they begin to make a little bit more sense. If she panics on the motorway, then she won't go out. Tip number 6, don't wait for motivation to come before you get help. Motivation is an emotion, and your emotions are currently not working properly. Just get started anyway. Tip number 7, who will you be and what will you do differently when you no longer have OCD? And do you have the skills required to do that? How can you acquire them? Is there a secondary gain by having OCD? Does having OCD stop you from having to face reality? An interesting thing, you may want to go onto Google and search the word secondary gain. It's an interesting topic. Tip 8, OCD makes you doubt everything. Therefore, you need a process to follow that guides you step by step through your recovery, or you'll begin to doubt trust in yourself to do it. Tip 9, are your family or caregivers unknowingly keeping you stuck by pampering to your needs or not knowing properly how anxiety and OCD operates, therefore giving you poor advice? And tip number 10, you probably will need some form of professional guidance and therapy to release unconscious habits, to release past trauma, and to change any self-limiting beliefs that you've developed. And I would just say make sure you choose a person who really understands anxiety, as in my experience, very few people do. I hope this short video has given you some new perspectives to consider and to better understand your condition. If you found it useful, please like it or share it on social media, and feel free to forward this link to anybody you know who's battling with OCD or anxiety. And there's lots more information on my website at www.johnglanville.com. Thanks very much.